The moment we saw the sky break, we knew we weren't alone anymore. At first, it was subtle, a distortion in the upper atmosphere, visible only at the edges of the world where satellites never should have picked up interference. Then, the signals came. Not radio waves, not electromagnetic pulses, but something older, something deeper, something that wasn't meant for us to hear. I was stationed at Orion Deep Space Array, one of Earth's last fully operational monitoring stations after the collapse. The station's job was simple: listen, find something, anything that could explain what had shattered the world we knew. For the past 10 years we had heard nothing, until today. The transmission came through at 0342 UTC, a pulse, rhythmic, layered with something that wasn't quite sound but felt like it should be, like a whisper in the dark. "Tell me you're hearing this," I muttered, my fingers dancing over the console. Dr. Lines, my only remaining colleague at the station, looked pale. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just stared at the waveform on the screen. It's not just a message," he finally whispered. "It's a response." The back of my neck prickled. We had been listening for decades, but now something was listening back. We analyzed the pulse for hours, trying to decode it. The pattern wasn't just random noise, it had structure. It was layered in a way that suggested it was constructed, designed to be understood. By who, or worse, by what? Then we found it. Buried deep within the waveform, hidden in the layers of data, was something terrifyingly familiar. Earth's own deep space transmission code. Lines's face went pale. This is ours." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" His hands trembled as he pulled up the reference logs. "This pattern, it's not new. We sent this out 40 years ago during the first deep space contact attempts." I felt something cold settle in my chest. We had sent the first signal, and now, after all this time, something out there had finally responded. The response wasn't a greeting. It was a warning. The distortion in the sky? It wasn't static. It was a barrier. A containment field, something watching us from the edge of our own atmosphere. And then the second transmission came. This time, it was clear. Not words. Not sound. Just a single undeniable message embedded into the pulse. "You were not meant to leave." Lines turned to me, his breath shallow. "We need to tell Command." I shook my head. "No. Command already knows. Because this wasn't new. It was a reminder. We weren't the only ones who had heard the message." The moment we attempted to transmit the discovery to Earth, something interfered. The relay station flickered, our signals scrambled, the connection severed. Not by a storm, not by a failure. By design. Lines slammed his fist against the console. "We're being blocked." I didn't respond. My mind was already racing through the implications. If something didn't want us to communicate with Earth, it meant Earth might already know. I turned to the external scanners. The distortion in the upper atmosphere was growing, shifting, expanding. "It's reacting to us," I murmured. Lines glanced at the screen, his fingers twitching over the controls. What if we push back?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then pointed at the data logs. "It's interfering with our signal, but that means it has a frequency range. If we hit it with a burst transmission, something strong enough to disrupt its whole..." He didn't have to finish, we could break through. It was a risk. If this thing was powerful enough to contain a planet, then what would it do when we struck back? But we had to try. I gave a sharp nod. "Do it." Lines's fingers danced across the console, setting up the pulse transmission. The array hummed. To life. Energy building. 5 seconds. 4. 3. A warning flashed on the screen. Incoming transmission. My breath caught. That's impossible. We blocked all channels. Lines paled. "It's not coming from Earth." The message appeared on screen. Simple. Direct. "You do not understand." And then the sky outside split open. A rift, deep and jagged, tore through the fabric of the atmosphere. Not a portal, not a gateway. A view. Through it, I saw something that shouldn't exist, a world beyond comprehension. Not a planet, not a station, not a fleet. A structure vast and ancient hovering in the void, watching us. Not aliens, not invaders. Wardens. We weren't being invaded. We were being contained. Lynes staggered back, his breath ragged. We were never alone. I stared at the structure, beyond the rift, my heart pounding, and for the first time I realized the truth. Humanity hadn't just been isolated. We had been quarantined. The rift didn't close. It hovered above the earth like an open wound, a glimpse into something far older than our civilization, older than our understanding of the universe itself. Lynes was still staring, frozen. We shouldn't be seeing this. He was right. The structure beyond the tear in the sky was not natural. It wasn't a fleet, wasn't a station. It was something built, not for war, not for conquest, but for observation. The Wardens were watching us. And they had been, for a very long time. The screen flickered again. Another transmission. You have seen what you should not see. The words weren't a threat. They were a statement of fact. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. We need to respond. Lynes shook his head furiously. No. We need to shut down the system, now. Why? His voice was barely a whisper. Because they don't want us to ask questions. The message changed. You were not meant to know. A chill ran down my spine. That was it. That was the truth that had been gnawing at the edges of my mind since the first signal came through. This wasn't a test. This wasn't a warning. This was containment. The Wardens hadn't come to destroy us. They had come to preserve something. The archives. I moved fast, pulling up the classified data logs that had been locked deep in the station's core. Orion Deep Space Array had never been just a monitoring station. It had been a failsafe, a last line of defense against something that Earth had already known, about files unlocked. Pages of redacted documents scrolled past. Lanes grabbed my wrist, his eyes wide. Lucas, stop. I didn't, and then I found it. Project Warden. I read the first line, and everything made sense. Earth has been isolated by external intervention. The quarantine is not to be broken. The entities beyond are not hostile. They are protecting something, not themselves, not the universe. They are protecting us from what we used to be. Lynes backed away, shaking his head. We were never supposed to know this. But I wasn't listening anymore. Because I understood now, the Wardens weren't protecting the universe from us. They were protecting us from ourselves. And whatever we had been before, we were never meant to remember. The moment I read those words, the station shook. Lights flickered, screens glitched, and an ear-piercing tone rang through the control room. The rift above Earth pulsed, no longer just watching, but reacting. Lynes stumbled back. We triggered something. The main console went dark. A new message appeared, stark white against the void. You were not meant to know. And then, containment protocol engaged. My heart pounded. They're shutting us down. Lynes spun toward the emergency relays, frantically typing. We need to transmit what we found before. The room exploded into static. A voice, not through speakers, not through sound, but directly in our minds. You do not remember. You were never meant to. Pain lanced through my skull. Images flickered, fractured, broken. A past that wasn't my own but felt too familiar. A civilization, vast and impossible. Worlds bending under the weight of a force we created. A hunger that spread through the void. A force that devoured and consumed, and then a great silence. Not defeat. Containment. We hadn't been isolated to protect the universe. We had been sealed away because we had once tried to consume it. The static stopped. My breath was ragged, my vision swimming. Lynes' voice was distant. Lucas, what the hell did we used to be? I turned to him, every part of me screaming at the truth pressing against my mind. Not human. The return of the past wardens had done more than contain us. They had rewritten us. Whatever we had been before, whatever force had driven us to spread, conquer, and consume, had been erased. We were not Earth's first civilization. We were its second, and the only thing keeping us from becoming what we once were was ignorance. The moment we understood, the moment we remembered, the quarantine would no longer hold. The rift above shuddered. They knew we had seen too much. And they were. Coming, Lines was shaking his head. We have to stop this. We have to. The transmission cut through once more. You have awakened. The seal breaks. The room plunged into darkness. I felt it before I saw it. The shift in the air, the slow, crawling weight pressing against reality. Itself, not an attack, not punishment, something returning. I met Lines's wide, terrified gaze. We were never supposed to remember, but we did, and now, it was too late. The station trembled. Reality itself trembled. The rift above the Earth, once just an observation point, was now something else. An open door. Lines was breathing fast, his hands gripping the console like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Lucas, tell me there's a way to stop this. But I already knew the answer. The wardens hadn't been keeping us in for their safety. They had been holding something inside us, keeping it dormant. And now, the seal was breaking. Because we had remembered. A final transmission flickered across, or the screen. We cannot stop what comes next. Only you can. The transformation. The pain returned, drilling into my skull. Flashes of something not human filled my mind. We had been more than conquerors. We had been reality itself, bending the universe to our will, a force without form, without boundary, a hunger that stretched across the stars, and now, piece by piece, it was returning. I felt it inside me, waking up. Lines gasped, stumbling backward. Your eyes? I saw my own reflection in the glass panel. They weren't mine anymore. Something else was looking back at me. The last choice. The station's alarms blared, not as a warning, but as a countdown. The final failsafe had engaged. Orion. Deep Space Array wasn't just a listening post. It was a kill switch. A single command could send a signal to the wardens, one final pulse, one last override to erase what had been awakened. I stared at the console, at the command waiting to be executed. This wasn't a choice between life and death. It was a choice between who we had become and what we once were. Lines's voice broke. Lucas, you have to do it. I looked at him, at the fear in his eyes, at the desperation, at the part of me that still felt human. I reached for the console, and then stopped, because I wasn't afraid. Anymore, I understood now. I turned to Lines, my voice calm. We were never meant to stop it. He screamed, but it was already too late. I had already made my choice, and humanity would never be the same. Epilogue. A new dawn. The rift above Earth didn't close. It expanded. The wardens didn't attack. They simply watched. Because the moment the seal had broken, they had already lost. We weren't prisoners anymore. We weren't contained. We were awake, and the universe would never be ready for us.